This week, Pete Morgan from Phylum is with us to discuss software supply chain risks. Then, in the enterprise security news, tons of funding, a notable acquisition. The line is blurring between services and product firms. Apparently, IronNet isn't dead. The toxicity of hero culture in tech, knowing when to quit. AI-powered fraud is hitting close to home. Quantum snake oil is getting worse. Prompt injection, and are you being hacked by your washing machine? All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
Identity is at the core of every great digital experience. Ping Identity's solutions support the scale, flexibility, and resiliency required by enterprise-level IT teams for lasting digital transformation. With 99.99% uptime and over 3 billion identities under management, they're the only identity vendor that's proven to champion the scale, performance, and security of large enterprises. That's why Ping Identity champions your unique identity needs. They give you the tools to offer your users the right access at the right times, no matter how they connect with you. Visit securityweekly.com/Ping Identity to learn more. 2024 will be the year of cryptography, driven by compliance requirements like PCI DSS 4.0 and the long-awaited NIST-standardized post-quantum algorithms. No longer can enterprises take their cryptography for granted. Cipher Insights from Quantum Exchange brings clarity to cyber risk blind spots that other point-and-scan solutions miss. The continuous network monitoring and response tool flags, scores, and prioritizes dozens of crypto risk factors in near real time, displayed through a single user-friendly dashboard for efficient management and remediation. Empower your NOC and SOC teams with actionable intelligence. Demonstrate proof of strong encryption required for zero trust. Gain the visibility and crypto inventory needed to begin your quantum-safe journey. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/quantum exchange.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Dark Chocolate Day. This is episode 348, recorded on Thursday, February 1st, 2024. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Admiral of AI, the Captain of Content, Katie Teitler-Santullo. How are you doing, Katie?
I am great, and I have lots of chocolate at my desk currently, so I'm pretty happy.
Yeah. Is that in any way related to one of the stories we're going to talk about later?
It is related.
Oh wow, that's a lot of Ferrero Rocher.
It is, yeah, it's a lot.
Those are the best.
But hey, you got to drive a hard bargain sometimes.
Yep. The correct way to eat chocolate, dark chocolate, not too dark though. Somewhere like I think the 72% is my happy place right there.
I really do prefer dark chocolate, and the darker the better. A lot of people will say that they, Swiss chocolate or Belgian chocolate is their preferred. I have always liked, when I've gone to Germany, they have more really dark chocolate, that's sort of 70 to 80%, and I love it. The more bitter, the better.
Wow, yeah. Sometimes my mom goes super dark, like 90+%, and it's a little too far for me. Like I need a little sweetness and not too bitter. It was also National Serpent Day, National Get Up Day, Optimist Day, and National Texas Day. Just all kinds of choices today, but had to go with dark chocolate. A little bit of an inside joke there because Tyler Shields isn't a big fan of chocolate, but he's not here right now. He's not coming in until the news segment. So
yeah, we can talk trash about him and his chocolate dislike all we want until he gets here, and then we can talk about it some more right in front of him.
We can talk about chocolate and Keanu Reeves all we want. He can't do anything about it.
No.
He can't. All right, quick announcement here. Don't let third-party risk ruin your Valentine's Day. Join Bill Brenner and I on an SE Media webcast titled Understanding Third-Party Risk by Studying Third-Party Breaches. As my regular listeners know, I love exploring risk through understanding of in my study of real breaches and incidents, and I'll use those to inform this webcast here. We'll discuss how to prepare for some of the most concerning third-party risks you should be aware of, along with our partner for this webcast, Process Unity. Visit securityweekly.com/Valentine Risk to register. And yes, that URL was my idea. Sorry, I had to kind of translate some of that into first person. I didn't want to talk about myself in the third person, which is how that works.
Well, if we have a National Pretentiousness Day, you could do that.
It'd still feel weird. It'd feel just as weird. All right. So today we're talking about software supply chain threats and how to deal with them. We're excited to have Pete Morgan with us to chat about this today. Pete is the co-founder and CSO of Phylum, different kinds of CISOs. He has been in InfoSec for over 20 years and has a background in offensive security. Welcome, Pete.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
How do you feel about chocolate?
Love chocolate. I think I agree with you more, though. Like, I'm 72, like above 80, it's a little bit too much for me, but I like the kind of slightly darker stuff.
Yeah, sounds good. And good answer. So, yeah, just to, so when we say, supply chain, SBOM, these all come up a lot in conversation now. Even though the White House has these terms on their website these days, it's really become mainstream. But there's a lot of potential rabbit holes we can go down when we say supply chain. So I just wanted to lay some foundation and get more specific about what we're going to be talking about today. And Pete, you can help guide me here. But I know for sure we're going to be talking about the kind of software supply chains that DevOps folks, that software engineers worry about. So definitely stuff on the server side, talking about NPM, PyPy, Ruby gems, all these places that developers get, there's so many layers here. Even if you're using a library, that library might itself have requirements and have to pull a bunch of other libraries that dependency hell that we know and love, that all software is all linked together through. But I don't know if we're going to go as far to maybe talking about Zoom now has an app marketplace. There's all these dependencies in SaaS tools and things like that. And it just seems like the supply chain is getting bigger and bigger and bigger every day.
Absolutely. It's, one thing, having worked in this area now for a while, and why the reason we started Phylum was to kind of address a lot of the concerns we saw when doing research here. Every time I see a package manager or an app store or anything like that, I get worried that all of kind of the sins of the past have been now recreated once again. And it's not an easy problem to solve, right? Building a package manager or an app store is complicated. And, if you kind of look to what iOS did, they took a lot of pretty strong positions, and not everyone loved it, but there was some benefit to be had from it too. And when we think about the software supply chain, there's a
now that's getting opened up, right? Thanks to the EU.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how that works. That will be fascinating. But when you talk about the software supply chain, that term can mean so many things depending on from what lens you're looking at it. And we definitely at Phylum look at it from the perspective of kind of where we see the most attack surface, and that is reusing packages from that someone else wrote. We can kind of call this open source, and the open source contribution, and it's great. But there's another term I think you could reasonably call it, and that's untrusted code from internet strangers. And the way a lot of these package managers work, when you download that code, whoever wrote that package, in many, many, many cases, has complete command execution capability on the person who's installing the package's computer. And this problem is not unique to programming languages either, right? It wasn't all that long ago that VS Code patched the ability for plugins to just arbitrarily execute code in the context of the user. That was a huge problem because VS Code plugins are effectively just NPM packages. And we just did some, cursory glancing through, not using any sort of like automated tooling, just kind of reviewing to see what they look like. And it was a horror show. But there's improvements that, we're seeing things make, but a lot of them kind of the nature of how software works makes it really hard to kind of just globally fix these. And, we're seeing the results of that through the result, attackers using this as a medium to break into organizations and target developers.
Right. And VS Code, the reason those are basically NPM packages, which NPM is JavaScript, right? Right. VS Code, just like Slack and so many other things, are just built on top of Electron, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how flexible JavaScript has truly become, but it also has, a lot of properties of being just about everywhere. And, there's an incredible amount of software developers that write JavaScript code. And when you look at the number of packages released every quarter, every year, no one is even in the neighborhood of NPM. It completely outsizes the majority of the rest of the software supply chain just by sheer volume. And, there's a number of artifacts I think you can probably dig into about that. The number of developers that write JavaScript packages, the design constraints of the language are also kind of interesting, right? Like if you look at the standard library of something like Python or Go, which has a comparatively very large standard library, on average per project, you see fewer dependencies than you do for something like JavaScript or Rust, because the relative standard library size of those languages is very different. But obviously JavaScript is everywhere. So, NPM is just the lion's share of where all the packages are. And, not surprisingly, that's where attackers go the most.
Yeah, they go where the users are, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's so we're probably not branching out into say Slack and Zoom and things like that. Like that's I guess you might consider that SaaS security or something like that.
It depends. So like I look at it from the perspective of who can write software to contribute to a given, let's call it package repository, and what is the process of getting that software released in the package repository. If I can just post something on GitHub and then go arbitrarily, make a new user on some package manager and then post my package, and when I'm done doing that, anyone can go download it. That's a very particular type of, that brings about a different set of risks. We've seen different cases where attacks are happening and they're kind of attackers releasing so many packages that the repository gets overwhelmed. And this just happened last summer with PyPI, where they actually shut down new package submissions because we knew there was an attack going on. Phylum was actually working a lot with the PyPI security contacts to report some of the malicious packages we were identifying, and they had one of their team members out on leave. And it's kind of another reminder that these are not massive teams of people. In a lot of cases, there's a lot of volunteer work happening. Some people they have full-time jobs, but these are nonprofit organizations in many cases, and volunteer work. So the people that are guarding these, incredibly important repositories are often doing this as a side job and as a contributing hobby to help that ecosystem out. Not really to defend against serious attackers that can very, very easily overwhelm them. If you think about building some malicious packages, which are really easy to do, and then writing a script to then, create a bunch of new directory names and directory structures, and then another script to go submit those all as new packages to a repository. It's not hard to imagine how to do this 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 times And how does the repository actually sort through that to figure out what's going on? It's a challenge that's not well solved right now.
Right. And just to lay out, kind of the landscape for anybody listening, that maybe doesn't have the full picture of what we're talking about here. It sounds like we're when I mentioned Zoom and Slack, that's more of a different attack surface. That's the developer, the engineer's laptop that might be targeted with something malicious coming from Slack or Zoom. Whereas what we're talking about is more the CI/CD pipeline, right?
I think it's both, really. And we've seen, looking at the malicious packages that we actually identify, and we have a lot of focus on JavaScript, Rust, Python, Ruby, Go, C#, Java, etc. Like the majority of the major programming languages used today. We see the majority of these targets are developer workstations. Some of them, I'd say probably more of the cryptocurrency case, may look for CI infrastructure because it's kind of like free compute, right? It's a wonderfully elegant botnet that you didn't need to build. But the majority of the malware we see really tries to target that end developer, where there's keys or secrets to steal and exfiltrate. Install a remote access tool, directly steal source code, or starting to see a lot more of the cases where it's trying to launch ransomware.
Right. And in a lot of these cases, like you mentioned, credentials, maybe it's not best practice to hard code credentials in. We know people still do it, and attackers know that. But a lot of this is very automated too, which I think is part of what makes this a little tough to combat. And I think this is what you've done to combat it. The solution has to be just as automated. Be part of that. The whatever process pushes things to production, or pushes things to dev or test to be tested before it goes to production. Where somebody's going to write some new code. Maybe they include some new libraries. Maybe for the first time. How much do you see where a human is in a loop to check out some of those new libraries that pop in for the first time? Somebody's decided I need this, this one tool to be able to do something for me, and they've got a new include in their code, basically.
Right.
Is that something that happens? Like, do they get checked out for the first time, or is all that stuff just fully automated and there's just new libraries just flying under the radar all the time?
Library creep is very serious, right? It's just too easy to go find something that someone else has written that advances you through the problem space you're trying to work through.
Saves you time, right?
Yeah, and to a large degree, I think business now kind of expects software development to operate at the speed that it can when it stands on the back of open source packages, which I would think maybe a mistake. But one of the challenges here to think about is, if I'm a software developer and I get a new job and they say, go work on this component or go fix this bug, and I can find a package that helps me finish that in half an hour instead of rewriting something that might take a day or two.
Well, if your competitor can build a new feature in a day, then you're going to be expected to build a new feature in a day to keep up, right?
This is just the nature of business, right? And I think there's an aspect where it's gotten expectant of software development to move at this speed. But that library I then used to go help solve the problem I had, how many libraries does that import? And if I look at that set and you walk out this kind of graph of first level, second level, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, as far as it goes, what software did I just bring in? And is that different than it was yesterday, the week before? And what exact package configuration did I get? Because each of those packages probably has semantic versioning, meaning, I can use my package needs package B version 1 to 2.2, and the next package has its own semantic version range. So getting the exact configuration of software, again, is kind of challenging. There's lock files that help with this, but the idea that we can go through this by hand is a complete fantasy. This changes so fast. And if we were actually really trying to do that, we wouldn't be able to get anything else done. I think last quarter we saw 2.5 million new packages released in the quarter. And, it amounts to something like 22 to 25,000 a day ballpark.
New packages released, or does that include older packages?
That includes updates.
Okay. Yeah.
Good distinction. It includes updated packages, but functionally that is a new piece of code. That needs to be analyzed to figure out, wasn't a maintainer account compromised? What's in this software, et cetera.
Yeah. So clearly we need some automation to be able to do that. And that means there's going to be patterns we're looking for, right? Like in some cases, it seems like some of these attacks should be fairly obvious. If a package that has never reached out, made an outbound TCP connection before is suddenly doing that and pulling down other software, I would think that should be a red flag. What kind of behaviors, what kind of patterns are you looking for in some of these package updates, that would set off a red flag?
Sure. There's a number of signals I think you can kind of look for. Let's say you see a brand new package that never has been released before. It's version 1. And then an hour later, you see version 6. And an hour later, you see version 99. And then 99.99. Well, that's not real software development, clearly, right? That doesn't exist.
Or it's just a 10x developer. Right.
Yeah. They just got very excited, and version number incrementation is like the thing.
Somebody just had a whole lot of caffeine and a whole lot of dark chocolate.
Yeah. Or they're trying to target a dependency confusion, right? And that's where if I have an internal repository that I typically get software from, and I have some packages that call it foobar, and that's one of my internal packages, and that's version 2.5. And then someone registers foobar for that ecosystem called JavaScript on NPM, and that version's 99. Well, if I don't tell it what version to update to, it's going to update to the latest. So it's going to go pull that later version package. So that's one of the aspects of dependency confusion. It's interesting. And you can kind of see those telltale signs by watching some of the behaviors of what the actors are doing in these ecosystems. There is a benefit in that. In order to affect other software developers, it has to be in the global software supply chain somewhere on one of these package repositories. So if we kind of analyze that and watch it all the time, you can see these types of attacks. Other elements are, just looking in for these different languages. There's common places where attackers have kind of command execution ability, and you look in the setup PI for a Python, like a pip, a PyPI package, or often in NPM packages, there's a little stanza called the pre-installation script, the pre-install script, and that literally just runs commands on whoever installs the package's machine. And oftentimes you'll see attackers start to mess with that and start checking out what they can do, where they are, what host it's running on, et cetera, or triggering other code execution. And, it's possible for attackers to be pretty stealthy with this kind of thing. But there's so few things examining this environment that they're largely not doing that. When you kind of spend some time looking at this across a large data set, most of the attackers are being carelessly loud because there's not really a lot of things stopping them. And it's effective, right? I think that'll change as
sneaky.
Right. Why level up if you don't have to? If what you're doing is working.
Yeah. So I would imagine it's a lot easier for an attacker to, or attackers in general, to submit new packages that are malicious and maybe use some kind of social engineering, like sending somebody a link, trying to get them to, or the equivalent of trying to get a developer to click a link or catching common typos, typo squatting, that type of thing, versus actually hacking and taking over packages? Like how much of, what's the most common here? What are the kind of different, if tomorrow I want to get people to run my bad code, what are my options for getting that bad code into their applications and on their systems?
Sure. Typo squatting is probably the easiest, simply because it is costless, right? If you have you think about just the name of a thing, and I'm going to call, Big Cup. That's a software product, let's say, and you calculate the typo squat candidates around Big Cup. You could just release all these malicious packages around it. And if that's a fairly popular company, let's say, or product of some kind, that will be effective. You will see people make that mistake or download that package. And package repositories will often take them down, but there's no limit to how many times you can keep mounting that attack. You can just run it through a script and automate it. And it's really a numbers game when it comes to that, but there are many other ways this can happen. A lot of the repositories are getting a little bit better about account takeover by requiring some of the top package maintainers. If you're the top 1,000 package, let's say, you're required to have two-factor authentication to release new software. Huge step forward, strong commend on that. I think it would be better if kind of all users really needed this to protect against account takeovers, but it still happens. Also, we see things with the challenges when you think about that dependency graph. If it was me, I probably wouldn't target the first level dependency that people are using. Like, I write a lot of Python. I use requests when I have to go hit a website or talk to a HTTP server. Love the package, use it all the time. I don't really, off the top of my head, know all the dependencies in requests, even though probably could. And did those change? Did they add a new package? I would look at it from the perspective of what's a bug they're trying to solve. Maybe I could, as the attacker, I could go try to patch that bug and fix it. And maybe my patch brings in a new dependency, which brings in a new dependency, which brings in a new dependency. And 5, 7, 8, 10 layers down that chain, there's that malicious package I wrote. And now the thought process is the people maintaining that software are going to need to audit all of this every time there's a pull request or someone contributing as an open source author. And unfortunately, it's just another fantasy. It's hard enough to get to keep open source authors not frustrated by some of the activity of the community, I think. And we have a lot of improvements to make there, but expecting them to be perfect with this is just it's not their job, and it's not realistic.
Right. So I imagine you can catch some of this malicious stuff at runtime. Certainly, I think one of the things we learned from the Log4j kerfuffle was that people who disallowed outbound connections from their servers, by default, were much more comfortable than people who didn't. And generally, a lot of these packages, I imagine, shouldn't be making outbound connections unless that's explicitly what they're for. But mitigations and things like that you can do at runtime, I imagine. But it looks like, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're doing here is primarily scanning the packages for things that look malicious.
So what we're doing at Phylum is doing kind of full-scale static analysis on all of the packages the moment they're released, and looking at all the way back to if it's linked to a GitHub or GitLab repository, the commit history, who the authors are, trying to kind of pull in all this data set to then figure out, does this, can we figure out if this is benign or malicious? And includes some targeted dynamic execution. Now, you really can't do that for every package release realistically yet, but you can do it for targeted things. But the goal again is to figure out, is this a benign open source release, or is it something that's trying to do something nefarious?
Right.
And there's telltale malicious behavior and nefarious behavior have, you can ascribe to some degree the intent. That behavior, there's really not that many things malicious authors are going to try to do. They want to steal files and exfiltrate them somehow. They want to cripple the computer, perhaps. Maybe it's a wiper, maybe it's ransomware. They want to, run a kind of survey perspective, or like a stage 1 where they might then download a stage 2 and kind of mount a more concerted attack against an individual host. There's not really that much. It's a little bit different than looking at just, are there any vulnerabilities in something like this, right? Because there's intents that are trying to happen there, and you can center around those to kind of focus on how an attacker may do that.
Right. And once you do flag one of those, once you discover something that's definitely malicious, how easy is it, I guess, in general, or maybe with, I don't know if this is something Phylum can do, but okay, now I know that something in this package is malicious. How easy is it to figure out who put that there, and then look for anything else that same individual might have done in, say, other packages, and go ahead and, just to be safe, flag all that stuff as maybe also potentially malicious?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It took a lot of work to build systems that can do that. When you think about kind of like a code pattern that might be indicative of malicious behavior, once you know that code pattern, it's not that hard to think about how you might search for that and other things. But if there's minor changes to that code pattern, or things that aren't exactly the same, well, textually, you're not going to have a lot of success with that. But then kind of looking at something like the abstract syntax tree, or varying degrees of an abstract syntax tree from an actual source implementation, and then doing fuzzy searching across those abstract syntax tree elements, it is a complicated, and it takes a while to build those types of systems, but it is extremely effective in tying together threat actors through observed behaviors. In the benefit here that, like when people talk about traditional malware, like a Windows computer, let's say, those are all compiled binaries, and it's a lot harder to you can find marking elements, but with open source packages, we have the full source code, right? So examining that source code and then trying to use all the advantages that we do have, given that it's source code, to tie these together has been really interesting, because we've definitely found attackers that have released software and then kind of implementations that are structurally similar in multiple different ecosystems. So like one in JavaScript, one in Python, sometimes Ruby. And it's not clear if this was just a take this code block and ChatGPT write this for me in Python, but structurally it was similar enough that when you look at it from like an abstract syntax tree perspective, you can see that similarity clearly.
Right. So you're talking about patterns in code, but I guess I was thinking more from like a threat intelligence perspective. Like if a certain GitHub user has been seen and submitting pull requests with malicious stuff in them, how is that something you guys are doing, or is anybody doing the work to say, we've linked the same user to this user over in NPM or PyPy or something like that, and kind of flag all the things that threat actor, whoever's linked to that ID has touched, and treat that as all those packages, all those things that they've touched as potentially dangerous.
We do, when we can kind of track that back, and in many cases when there's what I'd call a more voluminous supply chain attack and they're releasing a lot of packages, they won't link back to GitHub repositories. But they will come from a variety of different, they'll auto-generate user accounts or throwaway user accounts on like NPM or PyPI, let's say. So when we're able to kind of link those together, then it's, the research team works with the packet registry itself. So, we've worked a lot with NPM and PyPI and Ruby gems, et cetera, to as we find malicious packages, try to get them to take them down. In a lot of cases, it's it's been fairly quick, but in some cases, these packages have existed for years before they're identified and then actually taken down. And it's always a game where, in order to kind of see the next level of what it is you might be able to detect, you kind of have to build the level before it, and you kind of keep scaffolding on top of that. So, the concept of identifying all possible malware isn't really a real thing, I don't think. But even just what we're seeing so far has been, alarming. And again, kind of going back to that open source model where these are oftentimes nonprofits or people doing volunteer work, and the idea that they're supposed to be the sole guardian of protecting all these developers from what attackers might be doing is just, it's not a great configuration for success when you look at it from a security perspective. And I think more companies or maybe nonprofits or maybe more effort just in general, maybe through volunteer work, needs to be put into protecting these open source assets. This kind of goes, we talk about the software supply chain, but when you think about it from an attacker perspective, it's a lot more like a watering hole. There's only 12 to 15 places on the internet where everyone who writes code or builds systems gets the majority of their stuff from. Docker Hub, NPM, PyPI, Debian, Ubuntu, et cetera, right? Like and the attackers know where these places are. They don't need to they know where to poison the well. And if they are successful in doing so, it can have a monumental impact on everyone that's relying on it, right? Like the left pad incident from NPM where
somebody gets mad, removes
internet
their
breaks for 4 hours, right?
Yeah.
Like it's things move fast, and that's one of the reasons why we kind of have to stay on top of what's the implications of these things mean.
Yeah. So on the one hand, software repos aren't really earning anybody any money. Nobody charges for access to software repos. But on the other hand, it's kind of an essential part of the ecosystem, for things to work and not break. Everyone depends on it. It's part of the infrastructure of the internet and of tech and software in general. Everything is using these libraries, from the smart light bulb that's behind me here to everything that's functioning to allow me to do the podcast right now. So when we look at Apple in their mobile app store and Google in their mobile app store, they seem like they've been pretty good stewards of those software repositories, and mostly pretty good about keeping bad stuff out, or at least removing it quickly once it's identified and brought to their attention. But NPM is owned by GitHub, which is owned by Microsoft. There are big tech companies behind some of these software repositories, and still you're talking about us depending on volunteers and things like that. What's and on this show we've been talking about NPM, people submitting malicious stuff to NPM and injecting stuff in NPM install scripts and things like that for 2-3 years now. So what do you think is missing? Why is big tech not stepping up to protect these platforms, or to do more to protect these platforms?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and I'm sure I'm not qualified to answer that, but that hasn't stopped me before. If you look at Apple and Google, they're managing the security of their platform, which has their name on it, and the huge part there is that you have to have your application approved before that gets released, right? And there's people and lots of money and lots of smart tools behind how they do that. But even now, we're also looking at that perspective now after those things have been around 15, 18 years, something like that, right? And, they've definitely improved a lot over that time. But I remember when some of the restrictions on the Apple Store were very, partially looked at versus kind of the Play Store from Google. And you could compare the malware that you found in these respective registries very easily, right? Like you didn't see very much in Apple and you saw quite a bit in Play Store. Then, I think those processes improved a lot, but how do we find a way to do that for these open source package registries, which, at one point, these were just developer convenience tools. Package managers were not supposed to be these important security boundaries. They were supposed to be developer convenience tools to make their lives easier. And then you kind of like look away at something else for a minute and look back, and all of a sudden, these are really critical parts of right. And like, we're building Docker images off of reproducible, but trying to get to these reproducible builds. And what does that mean? It means reinstalling software from its source every single time. And there's just, it's changed a lot. And very, very few of these package managers were designed from the start with security in mind. And it's evident when you kind of dig into how they work. The idea that installing a package should enable the author of the package to just have command execution is kind of a bonkers idea, right? Like we used to make malware authors, send us creative emails and stuff, and like click a link. Now we're just accidentally downloading files, and they're just triggering on download, and it's things are moving fast in all directions, and this is just kind of one of those areas we have to come back and really be careful about and sweep up, I think.
Yeah, and we've got to be able to do it quickly, at similar speed, so whatever solution we use here, has to be quick. And speaking of that, before we wrap, I want to talk a little bit about your company's product here. I believe you do have, this is a freemium product. You have a free tier on it?
We do. Yeah, we have a community edition that's, you can just, register and use. It has some limits on how many projects you can use, but gives a really nice taste of the product and easy to use for kind of personal projects. And has full capability from what the professional or licensed version of the product is. But the basics are, we've tried to build the thing we need to protect ourselves and developers from attackers, because that's really who the attackers are going after. By poisoning open source packages, they're trying to target developers. And developers that on average are producing new binaries, they're producing new software, things that are traditionally difficult for EDR products to kind of respond to. And also these, this type of malware is not the Windows malware you might be thinking of. It's, something that runs entirely within a Python process or within a Node.js process. It's not calling, virtual-alloc and virtual protect on the Windows API that we can kind of just, use with an EDR product to kind of identify. So we really built that product to plug into CI/CD and on developer workstations where they can actually use it as almost kind of like a firewall. So try to install a package. You can configure the policy to your own liking, but really what Phylum does is says, we know about this package, we've looked at it before. Does the analysis meet the policy definition you've written? And if it doesn't, it won't install it. So one of those policies obviously is like no malware, right? No ransomware. And if we identify that, we can actually prevent that from actually being triggered on the workstation. But this also extends in the CI/CD system. So, you think about a developer making some changes and maybe they picked a bad package unknowingly, right? And they make a pull request, and the pull requests can, automatically trigger analysis on any of the changes. And now that pull request is kind of like annotated with the data that Phylum's identified about the issues, so that that can be kind of analyzed in code review and make sure it's fixed, and not spread to anyone else, through the analysis of a pull request or merge request. So it's kind of living in that developer workflow of how they build software and trying to, trying to grease the skids so they can continue using open source packages the way they have, but prevent them from stepping on the minefield.
Yeah. And I think we've seen this in the past, to be successful here, integration into the actual dev tools and the pipeline is really important. If you've got a separate console, somebody's got to go in, or even if they have to jump out to Slack, and there's messages on there, maybe it's too much friction for it to be effective, but yeah, commenting directly in a pull request, that's ideal. Yeah. Well, thank you for this, Pete. This has been amazing. I think we also have, you guys put out a quarterly report, and I think we have 3 of those from 2023 attached to the show notes for this episode. So folks can go there and they can check out those, the blog posts for those reports, and dig into, you've got a bunch of numbers there. You get a bunch of details on just the volume of stuff and the type of stuff that you're seeing, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I encourage anyone to kind of check out it's really what we see the attackers doing and like what's changed. So if anyone has any questions, I'd love to hear from you. But yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, awesome. Great stuff. Thanks again, Pete. And don't go anywhere. We'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.